Oh, yes.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to take my first look at one of the new core class figures from Transformers Legacy Evolution, and this is going to be the Dinobot Slug from Wave 1. Now, for those who may be uninitiated, the Dinobots are getting a full release, all 5 original members getting a full release in Legacy Evolution in the core class, with the ability to once again combine into Volcanicus. However, there's a catch this time. Their method of combination and the layout of the different members in the combiner are completely different, and they're getting a 6th member in the form of Scar down the road, who will presumably turn into an Ankylosaurus. And what people have pretty much already pieced together through hints from the devs and just the general layout and shape of the characters involved is that this does seem to be a pre-tool for an eventual core class Dino King combiner from Transformers Victory. Now, I do have very mixed feelings on this. On the one hand, the idea of getting a new Dino King is awesome, because he hasn't been redone since the original toy, which was, a Japanese exclusive, so very hard to get here in the States, and I believe was potentially prone to GPS in some of the parts. Not sure on that, but definitely had some parts that looked like they would be. So, of course, I'll happily purchase one of those, because I'd love to have a Dino King, but I am also kind of disappointed that his big premiere in Generations isn't going to be a full-size combiner. Yes, the original Dino King toy was very small because he was made of Pretender Micromasters, which was a really interesting concept. But in fiction, these characters, both Dino King and the originator of his mold, Monstructor, were full-size combiners, and their individual bots were, normal-size Transformers. So it's cool to get it, but I do hope that doesn't mean we're never going to see a full-size Dino King, and then by, that extension, a full-size Monstructor, because those are 2 combiners that I feel would just be amazing at the modern combiner scale. But we'll see. I don't want to get too sidetracked on that thought right now, because we got a toy to review. That being said, if you've seen my reviews before, you know how this goes. We're going to take a look at Slug's packaging, then we'll open it up, we'll see the instructions, and then we'll see Slug himself in dinosaur, robot, and even combiner piece modes. Naturally, I'll be doing some group shots and comparisons today, and then at the end of the video, I'll give my final thoughts. So Slug comes in your standard core class packaging for Legacy Evolution, complete with your half window here where you can see the toy, you get his name, you get all your logos and stuff. Get some nice artwork of his Triceratops mode here on the top. And then on this side, we get his robot mode artwork, with the core class designation underneath. Turn it around, we get renders of the toy in both dinosaur and robot modes. It takes 8 steps to transform between the 2 of them, and he's actually being called out as number 2 of 6 for Volcanicus. I'm guessing Sludge is probably number 1, though he tended to release after this guy here in the States. So I do like that they're keeping these combiner callouts and stuff, that they started this particular style with Menasor, and hope they keep doing that in the future. And then on this side, we get the left half. I can't even say good guy or Autobot half because it's a mixed bag now. But the left half of your Legacy Evolution side panel art. Here's our little instruction book for Slug, aka Slag, for you more longtime fans. And your usual brandings and everything. You get his name right here. Nice render on the front. Open it up. This shows you how to have him wield his tail blaster weapon. Then transform him into his Triceratops mode. Here's your QR code to scan him into the Transformers website. And then we get the instructions to transform him from robot mode to his combiner piece mode. In this case, it is the top of the torso portion as well as the head for the new Volcanicus. And they get this little layout like they do in Menasor, showing you the different pieces, right? So you got 1 and 2 here. Number 1, obviously, going to be Sludge. We know that this one right here is going to be Grimlock. And then, whatever the other makeup is. So, yeah, overall, it's very informative. I'm glad that they actually have the combiner instructions in here instead of leaving you guessing or saving it for a later release. And now we get to see Slug's Beast Mode. And, unsurprisingly, it's a mechanical Triceratops. Looks mostly faithful to his G1 design. They definitely get all the right cues there. It's got the gold face. They went with the silver jaw instead of the gold one from the Studio series, which is a little more toy accurate and allows the jaw to actually become like the chest ornament instead of a fake part being used. Gets a little robot feet on the back, gets his golden tail, though it's very stubby and is actually hiding Volcanicus' head there. He has this hole in his chest, which is actually used for the combiner bit. We'll see that with Sludge's review. And overall, I mean, it's pretty good. It looks pretty much the way it should. The mouth can open and close, but obviously it's kind of unhinging at the jaw for transformation, so anything beyond maybe that much doesn't really look right. The legs can move, you know, back and forth. These can actually go out if you want them to. Not sure if there's a use for that, but they can. He's a little hollow in the stomach region, but nothing too terrible. And, you know, I'd say the Dino mode, it's a very, very competent little beast mode for a, you know, core-size version of Slug here. I think really the only thing they could have done to improve this for what it is so far is just more paint apps. It would have been nice if the frill and the horns weren't the same gray as everything else. It would have been real nice, and then maybe, you know, paint these up a little bit in a darker gray or something. I don't know. There is room for improvement, but it's pretty much entirely in the paint department. Everything else about this, I think, is pretty much perfect for what it is and what it has to be. And here is a shot next to his leader class counterpart from Studio Series 86, which, in addition to being much larger, obviously, is made a lot more with the cartoon interpretation of Slag in mind. The cartoon designs weren't markedly different from their toy designs, the biggest thing just being kind of the coloration that was used. They went with much lighter colors, which he is emulating to an extent, but they weren't so hard up at being 100% cartoon accurate, especially when it comes to things like the lower jaw here. This guy goes way out of his way to use like fake kibble just so he can have the gold jaw in Dino mode. One thing I will say that's really nice about this toy is the fact that they engineered a way to actually have him open and close his mouth and still like hide the face and all that away. This guy, being much smaller and more basic, unfortunately doesn't do that. They both suffer from fairly stubby tails with obvious weapons sticking out of the back. His is maybe a little less obvious because at least it kind of color matches instead of having just a flat gray blaster sticking off the back. So neither one is perfect, but I think they're both still really good looking Dino modes, especially, you know, for their respective size classes. All right, now it's time to transform Slug into his robot mode. So the first thing I want to do is remove his tail weapon here. Just comes off the peg like that. Sweep the Dino legs back. And you're going to flip out the robot legs like so. Separate them. You're going to flip his little back wings out like this. The arms, you're going to rotate around to get the fists pointing forward like this. And flip this down. And there you go. Slug's tiny little robot mode. And, I mean, it's accurate. Looks the way it's supposed to. We can go ahead and give him his weapon now, which, again, is comprised of the tail and Volcanicus' head, just kind of hanging out back there. We can plug that in like so. Alright, so you get this. He looks good overall. He's a little on the stubby side, especially the arms, and they don't have elbows, but there is a reason for that. It needs the sturdiness for the combined mode and all that, plus it's got like the pegs right there where the elbows normally would be. His head articulation is interesting because instead of a robot head just moving around inside of this shell formed by the dino head, the whole thing just turns. So it's not accurate, but I can kind of see why it had to happen that way. The arms, in a rarity for a core class, are actually on universal joints. Right, swivel up and down and then go, you know, in and out. And again, that's for stability for the combiner. It's even got like ratcheted, you know, joints there, which is pretty cool. It's got a full waist swivel. And then the hips are unfortunately not nearly as sturdy as the arms. You can see they're actually pretty loose. They're on ball joints and the tolerance on them is not awesome. The knees are also on ball joints, but at least he has knees, I suppose. And these are better than the hips anyway. No ankle tilt, right? He's just got like your standard V stance just molded in. But overall, he's nice. You know, he's about what I would expect for a core class Dinobot. Obviously, the weapon is just kind of pulled from out of nowhere, but just like some of his other design cues, there is a reason for that, right? Like, he has to be a combiner too. Now, not everyone's going to be happy about that. I know a lot of people don't want them wasting resources on a combined mode that nobody asked for. But remember, these guys were really just an excuse for them to be able to do Dino King. Like, that's how the designers had to sell this to corporate. They're like, hey guys, Dinobots, and anytime they say Dinobots, corporate's like, yeah, because they know Dinobots sell. So that's their way of just kind of getting Dino King in there. So I get why it has to be this way. Would I have preferred these guys just be their own thing and not necessarily go that combiner route? Yeah, for the most part. Because like I said, I'd rather get a full-size Dino King anyway. The plus side of this is we are getting a new Dinobot member, one that has only appeared in comics before, in the form of Scar, so that's pretty cool. But despite all that, you know, him having to be a combiner and everything, I think both of his standard modes, the Beast and the Robot, came out looking very good and don't look really overly compromised. Like, they both look the way the character's supposed to look for the most part. Now, having seen some of the other core Dinobots that are either out or coming out, like in the case of Grimlock, we see that not all of them are going to be so lucky, especially that Grimlock. He barely looks like Grimlock, and you can tell that this toy was meant to be somebody else. So far, Slag or Slug is coming out the best for it. I guess his design just works best with the combination. Here's our leader class toy again for comparison, and you can see, you know, they went full cartoon accuracy as much as they reasonably could for this toy, because it is a Studio Series toy, and the whole idea of Studio Series is screen accuracy. This guy not being part of that is a little more free to just kind of mix up the design and borrow elements from, you know, multiple sources. Now these two are interesting because these two, in my opinion, stand out as the best in their respective assortments. Like, this guy, big improvement over Grimlock as far as complexity and just overall stability, all that. The Sludge toy in the leader class looks nice, but unfortunately tolerances on most copies are pretty abysmal, and he's very floppy, which really holds him back. And then, like I said, this guy's kind of the star of the show too. We've seen Sludge, who I'll be reviewing after this, and while he's not abysmal, his sacrifices for the sake of the combiner are much greater than this guy's. And then the Grimlock, he just looks terrible. Like, I'm not even going to be, you know, coy about it. The Grimlock in both Dino mode and Robot mode, and really even Leg mode, it just looks abysmal. Like, they really dropped the ball with that one. So these two are definitely going to be the standouts of their respective teams. At least until maybe I see the leader class Swoop. Swoop might be, you know, the one that really wows everybody. Especially if they decide to give him the missing weapons from his teammates. Because one of the most often criticized things about the Studio Series Dinobots is the fact that they don't come with all of their iconic weapons. They come with whichever weapon they were shown to use on screen. And screen accuracy is great if that's what you're going for, but I don't think it's ever a good thing to leave things out for the sake of screen accuracy. You know what I mean? It's like, well, he never used a sword in the show. It's like, okay, cool, but like, give him his sword anyway. Like, I'd rather have a sword than a stupid Daniel figure, but it is what it is. So even though Swoop is rumored to be Voyager size, there's still a possibility they could just release him as a leader and just include kind of a mini weapons pack that includes the weapons for his teammates. That would make these guys the total package. And this guy, again, I don't criticize him too harshly for not coming with all of his weapons, and even the one he comes with is obviously not very close to the source material, because he's got to be a combiner. This guy knows no such limit, though I wouldn't mind seeing a leader-scaled Volcanicus, you know what I mean? Like, just to see how that would turn out. Like, take the same concept they're using for these guys with the 6 bots and just scale it up with better articulation and everything. I'd be interested. I think most people would prefer that not be the case, and I kind of would too. But it's one of those things I'd like to see in theory. Alright, now lastly, we're going to go ahead and transform Slug into his Combiner component mode, which again is the upper torso and the head for Volcanicus. So let's go ahead and take the weapon from him, straighten his head out, close his mouth up. Now one thing I just noticed about the instructions, they don't actually tell you to flare his wings out for the robot mode. They have you leave him like this. But you're clearly meant to actually flare them out for that mode. But if you haven't, go ahead and do that now, because you will want them out for this. And then you're just going to fold the legs back together, reattach them here, plug them into the back of the pelvis. And you're supposed to point the legs down, like you're putting them back in Dino mode. Leave all this just kind of as it is. And you're going to separate the Volcanicus head from the tail. And the tail is actually not going to be used yet. You're going to need old Sludge to make that work. So you're actually going to set that aside for now. And we go ahead, Plug the Volcanicus head in there, and you get this. And I mean, it looks pretty cool for what it is. You know, it's just the top portion of this combiner. The Volcanicus head looks pretty much just like the old Power of the Primes or Selects version. They went with that same Grimlock-inspired design, despite the fact that Slug here, or Slag, is forming, you know, that part of his body, including the head. He still gets the dinosaur head on the front, which, you know, apparently is going to be modified to make Dino King, who had something that resembled, you know, some sort of a monster or dinosaur head on the front. Him being, you know, a recolor of Monstructor, obviously. So yeah, that's what it is. Doesn't look like much yet. Looks like a horrible abomination walking down the street. But, you know, it's a promising start. You can see where, you know, Sludge is going to plug in there, and I think his head, like, goes up in this recess here to hide away. So it's got me excited. You know, I do want to see this finished combiner overall. So far, from the designers, we've only seen 3 pieces, which is not very fun because it's just Volcanicus with no arms and 1 leg. So you can't even display it that way. It'll just topple over. But I think, you know, this is going to shape up to be the best looking combiner we've ever had at such a small scale. Because if you look back at, you know, the most recent tiny, you know, Legends or core scale combiners, there were those Terracons from Transformers Prime that turned into an Abominus. And yeah, I mean, it was a mess. They didn't have proper limbs at all. It just had monster limbs flailing around and looked like something from a sci-fi horror movie. So this, I think, will be at least a little more cohesive in design. And I am hoping it gets proper hands. That's the one thing I'm kind of worried about. Like, he obviously doesn't have dedicated feet based on the pictures, where the, you know, feet are just kind of part of the leg. But proper hands are going to be a must. If they, you know, pull some BS and just have little bits of kibble sticking out and call that hands, I think this will be like an absolute failure of a combiner. So I'm hopeful. I think they're going to do right by this design and make it look like a somewhat mini version of the full-size Volcanicus, which is going to be important because the real thing everybody's waiting on is that Dino King. So if this doesn't turn out good, the Dino King's not going to be good. And we'll have waited many, many years for just a half-hearted rehash that just pales in comparison to the original. So I'm going to stay hopeful. But, you know, we've been hurt before. So I'll keep my expectations realistic. And this completes our quick look at the new Core Class Slug, or Slag if you prefer. Overall, I do like this. I think it came out quite well in all 3 of its modes. Everything looks the way it's supposed to. Like the Triceratops looks competent, the robot mode looks like a mini version of the robot mode, and even that combiner portion looks pretty good. Now it looks, you know, kind of lacking without other pieces to attach it to, but when we do the Sludge review, you'll see that the torso actually comes together pretty well and looks like you would want it to. So I'd say it's a good effort overall. I would say that it's got me hopeful for the other Dinobots, but we've seen, you know, 2 of the others now, and well, I don't want to spoil too much for Sludge. And, you know, Sludge has his qualities. The Grimlock, I think, is an absolute disaster. Like, just, he looks terrible. Of course, we'll get to that when we review him, but so far, I'm not impressed at all. I think he looks worse than, like, some of those like low-budget, cheap Grimlock toys they throw out there at the big lots and stuff. So, yeah, so far I like this guy. And if you were, you know, worried about the combiner aspect ruining this toy, I'd say it doesn't. I would say he overall works at his scale and pulls everything off well enough. Can't say that about necessarily all of them, but if you're looking for a mini Slug toy, I think this guy will cover him, because, you know, I think that's about the best we're going to get for a long time at this scale. And if you want a little guy to go with, you know, your core class like Optimus and Bumblebee and all that, I think he fulfills that role very well. Of course, that is just how I feel about this Slug toy, so now I want to know what you all think of this. Do you think this is a good effort on Hasbro's part to come up with a, you know, little core class Dinobot, especially one that has to combine? Are you happy that it is a combiner? Maybe you are, you know, one of the people out there that actually likes the idea of having a Volcanicus combiner out of the Dinobots. Or do you not like this? Either you just don't need a core class Slug, you don't like the combining aspect, or you just don't like the way they executed it. Any and all feedback is always welcome in the comments section. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to toss it a like. Let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this look at the brand new Transformers Legacy Evolution Core Class Dinobot Slug. And with all that said, I will see you next time.